Sitting in the ominous chamber of the deep labyrinth, Valar made scattered notes on whatever came to his mind. Much of his process entailed as much, in fact, and many could not comprehend the disorder in which he made his notes about anything and nothing. He was the sole man able to piece them together in the end, at times creating whole complete studies of these fragments. There were plenty of ideas to take note of recently within the Temerian halls. He had recently been presented with one of few fragments of text uncovered in the long forgotten halls, detailing what they believed to be an ancient worship ritual. He had not managed far in the small translation before his mind ran into new tracks. Listening to the distant, unknown murmur that previously had been so frightening was now quite stimulating for the thoughts.
Master Valar!
A low voice emerged, mingled with the odd sound from the walls, made him at first disregard it as something equally immaterial as his ideas. Footsteps came loudly from beyond, closer and closer. The protectors flew up from their idleness and stood by the doorway as the voice and steps approached.
Master Valar, come quick!
Fellow Master Sylvester came running inside, grabbing the shoulder of the nearest protector.
You must come quickly! One of the students is in a state!
Valar stood up. The grabbed protector took hold of his hand and respectfully removed it.
Are there threats? Bah, of course there are. Bring medicine, or anything, just come and see.
Sylvester's tone and wording made the impression that chances were good of exaggeration. But all the same, the Protector and Valar followed the rushed master back from where he had first appeared. They took a turn right into an abrupt descent down a stairwell where they emerged in a larger chamber with a curved roof and plenty of recesses where coffins rested. A crowd was gathered around a man lying on his back down onto the stone floor. From the opposite side of the chamber entered two equally distressed-looking characters, one being distinguished as a doctor. The man was young, with a faint stubble, and was clearly suffering. He breathed rapidly and had a wild expression in his maniacally open eyes.
What happened?
Valar turned to Sylvester. The doctor came up and knelt down by the man.
He just keeled over, like the health simply left him. I ordered a doctor at once, then... What?
The man on the floor had shut his eyes and now started to make piteous sounds. "Can you hear me?" the doctor asked, and the man appeared annoyed by the question, as if woken from deep slumber.
Yeah. My head... it rings. This ringing.
The doctor looked him over, snapped with his fingers and looked into his eyes. Valar stepped forward.
What happened, son?
The man looked around confusedly, but repeatedly closed his eyes from the apparent head pain.
I got sick. I must have. Oh my God.
His motion grew still, and his face pale, eyes locked to the ceiling. Oh my God. The signs. Tears began to gather in his eyes. Oh, they... Ah!
He is delirious. Can't you give him something?
Valar turned to the doctor, who began stressfully rummage around in his bag, to the increasing sound of the man's worried moans.
I may have some sedatives. I'll be right back.
He rushed off, and the man began to crumple up into a fetal position, clutching his knees, laying sideways as tears flowed onto the cold stone.
Come now, gather yourself, son.
He feverishly shook his head, while the complaintive moan transitioned into a fully fledged weeping. Resigned, Valar stood and could not help but feel pity for the man's disposition. Some of the disheveled man's peers began to distance themselves from the scene, as they did little to contribute to his well-being. Valar singled one of the departing scholars out with a pointed finger.
You.
Meanwhile, the doctor speedily returned with the proper means to calm the dispirited researcher.
What is the cause of this? How come he suddenly despair?
Oh, Master Valar. It was so strange. I did not see it all.
What did you see then?
I was naturally in the middle of my work. I only caught on when he had been muttering and groaning terribly for some time, though it was Gerag over there that began comforting him. He pointed to a man standing to the sides, talking with other spectators, with their attention still turned towards the spectacle.
Very good. You there.
The group diverted their attention to him as he paced up to the man of interest.
Have you been here long?
No? You mean me or the whole team?
The group. Who was he? I'm trying to uncover this inception.
Alright. It was quite frightening, to be honest. The rest of us had barely gotten in order. I mean, he was just doing his job. Nothing wrong at all, and then... His eyes were drawn back to his unfortunate colleague.
Then what? Was there anything strange about his episode?
No, not at all. He was walking about the room, taking his notes. He grew quiet and had found a volume when I looked over. He went through it until he began groaning. Of course, that's when I went over, as he sounded more and more, well, sick. It just became worse when I got there and he slumped over. Valar looked back, searching the vicinity.
Where is that book you mentioned?
The book? Oh, I put it here. He spun around, behind him being 3 tables placed. He stood by the voluminous book, one hand presenting it.
What is it?
I do not believe we have examined it. It was bound in scruffy brown leather, appearing like fur at some places. Once there must have been clear symbols etched in a pattern all over. Now there were only faint remnants. The pages were written in the strange, unorthodox Sumerian signs, being very crowded with small symbols and much confusing adornments of the pages. Generally, the grammar was nothing like that which was familiar, perhaps not even being fit to be referred to as grammar. Spacing could vary dramatically, and at times A single word could appear to go on for several lines. At times, they did not even write horizontally. What made these circumstances was not yet known, but looking at the book, it made less sense than before. Some letters were familiar, but very few, and there seemed to be drawings all over the pages where the text existed in the empty spaces of said drawings. The depictions were as confusing as the symbol's structure, as they did not depict anything recognizable. They were simply unintelligible patterns of intricacy that formed astonishing shapes, but nothing that triggered a coherent parallel with something known. He did not make much effort to understand it, and soon turned back to the student who had initially laid eyes upon it. He now sat up, a blanket over his shoulders, but still very wide-eyed.
"Son, feeling better?"
He nodded shakily.
"Might you tell me what afflicted you?"
He quickly, and with fear, glanced over at the book. "I don't know." He spoke fast and slightly incoherently. "I can't. It was so horrible."
"What was, son?"
He glanced over to the book once more. "The things in the... more than meets the eye. It spoke to me."
"Pardon?"
He shook his head violently. "Please, don't make me recall. None should read the book."
"But what did it say? Rather, what was written?"
"I don't know. I could not hear it properly. So many sounds. But, oh, the things only written in words were horrible. But that was not all. Oh, Master Valar, their texts, their signs, they are arcane. Alive! They began to take my mind. I had to throw the thing to save myself. You understand? Ow! He grasped at his head and tucked it between his knees where he sat. Valar shot up, apologetic for likely inducing yet another case of delirium. The doctor held him firm and brought a vial to his mouth, which in time brought calm back to him. The old people were exceptionally proficient in many crafts, as one could solely observe on the labyrinth's masterful and mysterious layout. To Carol, the most intriguing was their adorning symbols, their art, and otherwise runes that all had much deeper meaning than met the eye. When she had been utterly overwhelmed by findings being poured in from the place, she had more and more gravitated to simply locate herself within the ancient halls, where her work had its origins. Working from within the labyrinth did certainly bring an aspect of fright, but was endurable with the accessibility. Working inside the labyrinth consisted mostly of identifying things that were to be sent topside, and to conduct proper evaluation on subjects that proved difficult to move due to physical obstacles in their way or for convenience. The bodies of the labyrinth denizens would be dissected and researched on the spot, with only some organs being preserved to be brought out. Currently, from within a lesser chamber rendered to feel rather constricted with a wide table in the middle of the square floor, she was documenting the otherworldly art that covered the four walls in one consistent piece. In her opinion, studying the original work over some drawn copy proved to supply much more insight. So much more, in fact, that it appeared supernatural. In front of her on the table was an illustration she had made herself of the immense mural, together with smaller pieces like pottery, tools and other miscellaneous she thought to have curiously spotted parallels or resemblances, links that would reveal the secrets of the mural. "Here you go, Carol." Something heavy was placed opposite her on the table. She looked up and saw Millard placing an entire tombstone flat on its back upon the wood. Though a Thumerian tombstone was not very akin to what is commonly known as a memory of the dead, only their likeness made the name persist. "Oh, Millard, could you join me? I would like to go back into the chamber just done over." "Sure. Should I carry something?" "No, it's all right." He turned to the two protectors standing by the doorway. He only nodded towards the door, and they both nodded back, having noted yet another of their ventures. Carol rolled up the large arc of paper and stood with it under her arm. She smiled at him and shuffled her way over in the narrow space between the table and the artistic wall to the exit. They would arrive into a hall slightly higher in the ceiling and much wider across the floor. Recesses in the walls would have one believed them fit for preservation of bodies, but said the carcasses were lacking. Where these holes were absent, the walls were chiseled with images of surreal pieces. In some, one would have to look long and hard to grasp just some of the motives as recognizable. Otherwise, they depicted imagery heavily dependent on the beholder's own interpretation. Or at least, that was their belief. Located deeper inside, about in the middle on the right wall, was the piece she had caught an interest in. She thought poorly of her own copy when looking once more at the original. The things the Thumerian did with the walls of stone was only paralleled, if not surpassing, with what the seasoned master did with brush and canvas. Only the old people must have possessed some arcane implement akin to a brush in order to so delicately carve the stone. "It is beautiful, even though I'm not totally sure what I'm looking at." "It is. Here." She pointed to a pattern made in the middle, consisting of several lines flowing in and out of each other. "This is heaven." "It is? On the ground?" She sniggered. "There is no ground in this picture." "No? Then who are these characters?" "Stars. They personify them." "But how could I even see them? I mean, when they live like this?" "It is a mystery." She heard a particular noticeable sound in the distance. It bothered her because it sounded human in a way. Otherwise, she would have disregarded it. But Millard did not seem to notice. "Did you hear that?" "I don't pay it any mind." He was not bothered. She stood silent, listening for the sound. Indeed, it was a scream, shrill and of broken vocal cords. She looked down the hall and moved towards its end. Millard was close behind. She stopped before a large corridor leading into darkness. The sound was still faint, but it came from inside, now more like a roar than a scream. What is it? Don't you hear it? Listen carefully. I think someone is in trouble. He seemed anxious with her standing directly in the doorway. But the sound persisted. Perhaps it was even growing the more she listened. There's nothing, Carol. Nothing at all. Her mouth opened slightly from the concentration. There was more to it than just a roar. Something that was intriguing. Even more so, mysterious and alluring. Millard grew impatient. It's just another sound. No one has gone down this way. Let's just ignore it. She ignored him. She noticed that for every roaring interval, more properties were revealing themselves. Had it been closer, she knew it would have frightened her terribly. But listening to it, it captivated her. It grew more distinguishable, as if she could picture the source of the sound within her mind. It must be a terrible beast of a man or woman. It rapidly grew louder and echoing, and like it had taken physical properties, like a wind, it flew towards her out of the hallway and surrounded her senses. She was thrown to the floor and covered her ears. In her mind's eye, she saw claws and a spiraling rage, while the ethereal roar sounded inside her very head. Millard grasped hold of her, but she did not hear his plea. She tried to mouth the word beast, but she could not hear herself while her eyes were locked with Millard's. Eventually, his presence would overcome the sound, and gradually his voice began to banish the horrific impression. She was breathing fast and heavily, noticed only now when she grew calmer and sounds returned. Carol, calm down, please. I'm all right. It's gone. What? What beast? What happened? She blinked her eyes and discovered a terrible headache. My head hurts. Let's go back. See to it. He lifted her up. She could stand on her own, but felt drowsy. The roar still present within her head. Or was it still present outside? I heard a beast, I think. Or... I never heard anything. Let's fix that headache. Then you can explain what happened, alright? The hour was late, and the moon was close. A breathtaking view when Bergenworth was bathed in the moonlight. The lake lay desolate still. Carol stopped on her way to the main building to admire the view and linger in the memory of the experience that now had her seeking the provost. The building was empty when she entered. Only Willem sat behind the desk in the middle of the floor. Master Willem, she announced quietly, so as to not disturb the calm presiding inside. The mitre he normally wore tilted upwards and turned her way. From behind the books and shelves on the desk, his masked face appeared, covering only the eyes with a decorative cover with two half-spheric shapes over the eyes. The fact that he still could see with such a masquerade mask only added to the eeriness, as one would appear quite blind with the article on. But his smile was unmistakably that of the old Provost Willem, something that had her tolerate his method of covering his terrible scars. "Is it done?" His voice was equally low as hers, but was distinguished quite well in the hall. "Yes, I actually heard something," she said proudly, and delicately approached the desk. "Then let's have a look." He put away the book occupying the center space. She presented a little paper to him which depicted a 5-pointed star drawn in curved lines with what resembled an eye shape in its center. "Ah, it feels strange to see it here, but that is it. There truly was something to that dreadful experience now, was it not?" "Truly, I would never believe it was such. It had such nuance." He looked a moment longer at the symbol, and his mouth began to move faintly, uttering silent words of unknown meaning. Eventually he turned back to her. "What was it that truly made it reveal itself?" "I think it was when you earlier described it as you can hear it. That made me think it over again. And just now, well, I heard it." He leaned back in his chair slowly. "You have touched upon the true greatness, what we truly seek." "But what does it mean? I don't understand. What did I truly hear? And where did it come from? Describing it as a mere sound might be the most appropriate, but does it know justice?" He held up his hand to calm her vain reasonings, keeping his sly expression. He leaned forward and pressed down his index finger on the paper. "This signifies the start. Here we commence our journey towards insight. This symbol is not for you to understand. You see, what you heard was a much deeper meaning than we were designed to understand." "Then what is it?" Willem leaned back again, carefully touching his masked forehead, beneath which was a burned and scarred visage, made by Thumerian fire. "The gods are very real, my girl. More so than you or I. The Thumerians stood them close, so close that they could partake of their wisdom and their blood. But something changed, since today the all-so-great ones are no longer as present as they seem to be with Thumeru. But we are on their trail now. That's what this eye means. To describe its full meaning is simply not possible with human words alone." He stroked his finger in a circle on the silvery surface, right on the forehead. "But I have heard the message clearly. It encourages me to look for answers, to seek their greatness. It would appear that Willem had a much deeper insight in the meaning of the thing that Carol touched upon. But she heard it too, a deep, omnipresent and great uttering. Even at this moment, she could still hear it, if she concentrated enough. Like a little whisper in the back of her head, akin to a thought, and giving that uttering a shape made it more real, more comprehensible. But what itched her mind most of all was if she could still hear it after having first heard it in her chambers. Had something found her just now, or had she found something that was present all along? I wager, my girl, that if you pay attention and listen in the same manner as you just did, they have more to tell you. Carol had found wisdom in the provost's advice. She may not have shared in his conviction of the great gods, but she was convinced that if she heard one uttering, its nature could still be uncovered. Maybe one day she too would share his beliefs. But that day was not easy to picture while she glared at a vial of murky blood. The conclusion had been that the vials found in the labyrinth were too different from the keeper's own blood, while still retaining the overall properties of conventional blood. Their remarkable qualities indicated that the preserved kind was more close to a different source, perhaps even a wholly unique substance that had been the cause to the blood of the Thumerian altercation. Their nature would prove their previous owner to be of an entirely different species, having only the color as a peculiar similarity in relation to humankind. Thus it was that the still roaming beings of the labyrinth could have once been very similar, if not entirely so, to the current shape of man. But as it now was speculated, something had been mixed together with them. The discovery of this blood was the first proof that demonstrated the theory. With that conclusion in mind, she had made her way to the laboratory in search of inspiration. Luna patted her on the back, who regarded her presence as a friendly visit over experimental purposes.
Boy, this is exciting, huh? I cannot bear the anticipation. Imagine what will turn up one of these days. Perhaps this even is the very blood of their gods.
Her excitement was unending, and overcame her own bearings, forcing her to step away for brief spells to compose herself.
That would be something. It looks rather unremarkable, though. Very similar.
Thrown off from her focus, she idly panned her view around at the testing and researching conducted on the blood. Her visual locked onto a vial that had not yet been removed from the ornate chest it had been found within. Amongst the large and the sometimes ostentatious glass vials and decanters, she saw one that was very unremarkable and small. Its contents looked outright repulsive to the degree it had caught her eye, despite the plethora of more pleasing alternatives. Not that it was too dissimilar from the rest, but its appearance was turbid and possessed a more vibrant but darker crimson hue. She stood and moved herself over to it. The trunk with blood sat atop a table by the wall, where she sat herself down. Much like she had done before, she lay her chin on her arms against the table surface and stared into the blood, trying to think. There was no real motivation for doing so, but considering how random the impression from the previous night had been, what alternative methods were there? Luna did not comment her departure, but could be heard continuing shuffling around and writing on paper. While sitting in front of the morbid liquids, she found herself being drawn to the inconspicuous flask, particularly in relation to the rest. It was indeed considerably more plain than that of the other's decorative appearance. A narrow glass container that upon closer examination appeared to be crafted with some other form of glass craft entirely. It was in a brighter, shinier tint than glass usually was, appearing as if made of crystal. A stark contrast to the near black, murky blood it held. She tried to think back to her thought process the night before, how she had pondered Master Willem's weird description of his own mind and ideas, while looking only more intently on the little vial. But the more she tried to recall the process in detail, the more distant the whole concept began to feel, and she resorted to try and cleanse her mind, to start over. For how long she sat like so could not be discerned, but in the void of personal thoughts, new impressions began to emerge. Slowly it felt like inspiration returned to her, and that her ideas began to healthily bloom after having cleansed her focus. But it immediately felt strange, like if she just remembered something, only the memory felt displaced in her mind. Upon identifying the notion, it seemed to slip away, and she pleaded internally for it to stay by giving it more thought process, or rather, simply letting it play out as it came to her. What appeared in her mind were nonsensical and utterly incomprehensible impressions, like a very vivid daydream, with their meaning completely meaningless to her. It could not be pictured in images, written in words, or spoken in languages, but what they all shared in their nature was a single base feeling, a burning. It was unpleasant, and her attempts to distance herself from the foreign senses failed. Her head began to hurt, and she closed her eyes only to see a frantic blur of black and red.
Carol? My God, are you all right?
The sense of corruption left her when Luna's hands grabbed hold of her. The headache was yet present, but of a more familiar nature. Luna stared astonished at her.
Carol? What happened? Is something wrong? Oh, it's this thing. I have the worst headache.
She grew more dumbfounded.
You were shaking, like possessed. You sure it's just a headache? It's fine now, more or less. It's just this thing. Hold on, I'll get you something to feel better.
She abruptly left her side and flew through the laboratory out in the corridor. She was left with the embarrassment brought by the onlookers in the room who had become aware of her episode. She turned away from their sight, twisting in her chair, The blood stood as it had always done, but the memories still lingered. Or more than just memories. Like a whole compact experience. It was then she realized that she had managed once more. She fumbled for some stray paper to the side of the desk. She searched for a pen but found none in the vicinity. The search was hurriedly expanded to adjacent desks until she found one. Sitting back down, she began to unpleasantly revisit the things still left within her. Now only itching on her still present headache, she managed to produce a symbol that she thought accurately portrayed what the blood had originally given her. Luna returned with a small vial of tablets.
Here you go. See if they do the trick.
She swallowed one of the herbal compounds on the spot. It did little immediately for her condition. She slid the paper over towards Luna.
Look at this, please.
She had drawn 4 vertical ellipse shapes, positioned in a vertical line. Each shape was adjoined with the one below, the top one being the largest, and they proceeded to become smaller the lower they were positioned. At the loop's conversions, she had drawn convex lines.
What is it? Here, look at it closely, please, and tell me if you see anything. Or feel anything.
Feel? Luna mumbled and stood with a questioning face. She threw a much too quick glance at it and just shrugged.
It's pretty, I guess.
She grabbed hold of Luna's hand and brought her closer.
Please, concentrate. Just one moment.
She stared into her eyes, and Luna sharpened herself before the importance. Her eyes fell back onto it in a more engaging attempt. Surprise shortly appeared in her eyes, as if she just thought of something and turned to Carol.
For a second, I thought I remembered something. But it's strange. It's like...
The words trickled out as her eyes returned to the depiction.
What was it you remembered? I don't know. But it was not a pleasant memory, I can tell you that much. But it's gone now.
Carol nodded in agreement.
That's what I gathered as well. It was not a memory.
Luna's forehead wrinkled and she tore her look away from the rune, now with a higher conviction.
What happened? This rune? Like... spoke to me? Well, I know how it must appear. I am still experimenting with it. So far, think of it as a surreal language.
She smiled at what she thought was a clever but short explanation.
It seemed more like a seizure than a scientific revelation. Oh, right. Sorry. It was because of that.
She pointed towards the flasks. Luna walked towards them, turned back to her as she did not fully know what she precisely indicated towards.
The one in the front. The tiny one.
She hovered her hands over the vials. Carol shook her head and waved with her fingers more to the right. With trial and error, Luna eventually succeeded in finding the correct one. Examining it, her expression suggested she agreed it was a particularly morbid blood vial.
These are not yet examined,
Luna informed while looking at the flask. swirling with it in her grip and possessing an inquisitive expression.
You mean this one? Well, now I want to find out what this could be. How exciting!
She made a copy of Carol's rune upon a little piece of paper and tied it around the bottleneck.
But we are making great progress here.
She heard Lauren's voice, apparently in the middle of a discussion, and she looked up to see him and Master Willem entered through the door into the laboratory right when Luna exited.
It's the most definitive lead we got at the moment.
Willem followed slightly behind him, arms at his back and the head slightly lowered.
My opinion is still the same, my boy. This is not the core of what we are after.
But that would mean we have to find it. We have something right here, right now. If we put more effort in studying the blood, it may very well point a way at least. Willem's eerie mask directed itself towards Carol.
The blood is just a product of greatness, not the cause of it. You have to agree that is the most logical reason.
I do, but studying the product could make us see how it came to be. Willem walked up to the table where Carol was seated and sat himself down.
I do not want to see the efforts forfeit, Lawrence. My point is that they might be the most obvious, but not the truest. Now hush, we'll resume later.
He smiled towards her while shifting his body in her direction, marking the end of their current conversation. Lawrence, irritated to give up on the topic, took a seat beside his master under protest.
Any new discoveries, Carol?
Oh, I would never be sure. If I thought correctly, Luna might confirm something in just a moment.
Willem chuckled amusedly.
Like any skill, it takes practice. Tell me, did this revelation come any easier than the last one?
Well, not exactly. I'm not sure yet what it was. In fact, it was rather dreadful.
Lawrence raised his eyebrows inquisitively at her, and she was made aware of his unnerved disposition.
You see, Lawrence, I am trying to figure something out. It concerns my episode in the labyrinth as it started a, personal query, I suppose.
Oh, you mean something has happened again? He sounded worried, and she grew hesitant.
Do not fear for me. It was nothing. Willem helped me along.
The glance Lawrence threw hastily on the provost skillfully concealed his irritation. At least it did to Willem. All right, but please, do not indulge it further if it becomes dangerous. To me, it sounds like you should try and be careful around it.
Might I see it?
Willem abruptly said, like he was just waiting to move along, and furthermore, like he had known since walking into the room that she had produced yet another symbol. She slid over the note she had first drawn upon. While Willem calmly looked at it, Lawrence leaned in closer to inspect it. The revelation must have struck the provost immediately, as he after just a short moment leaned back with a smirk. Bothered, Lawrence looked at him, took the note and turned to Carol. What is it?
Take your time. The meaning is there, but you must feel it and hear it. And, just try, would you?
His brow furrowed, but he obliged and turned his gaze down. His expression was at first hesitant, looking absent-mindedly around the symbol's shape. His eyes would eventually center themselves and remained still and focused. An expression very similar to what Luna had shown struck him swiftly. Huh? What a coincidence. He looked up at her. Her elation shined through with a smile, and she looked over at Willem. The provost, with a smirk, tapped his index finger on his forehead.
What was, Lawrence?
Nothing. Just a thought that passed while looking at it, and it was a coincidence. Do not make fun of me.
Not at all. It is supposed to do that.
He glanced down once more, now looking slightly reviled and confused.
Carol, Willem began, is one of the rare sorts. The sort that takes a while and listens, observes the things around her. She questions not or applies crafted reasonings, but perceives things just as they are. Thankfully, she managed to make a translation of the things we others tend to miss.
But what is it supposed to mean? He stopped to further look at the symbol. His eyes widened somewhat and his nose wrinkled. I mean, the feeling is mine, though. You are actually telling me it's supposed to come from this? Willem waved a silencing hand and lowered his head. He sat like so for a while. Just about when she started to feel uncomfortable by his sudden petrification, he spoke again.
This is something extraordinary, the work we do. We are used to finding answers, and we expect that there are always answers to be found.
He became still once again, taking a long inhale followed by an equally long exhale.
But with this, those expectations do not apply. The great ones are beyond us, beyond our very being. They play by different rules, and so must we, if we are ever to match their greatness.
He turned his head to Lawrence, who did not fully meet his concealed eyes. As it often were, one could only assume Willem peered straight at them from behind the circular half-spheres over his eyes on the mask.
It is important for you to grasp this, to humble yourself to the wonders we will see here, and don't expect the answers to be found so easily, perhaps not at all. Expect that answers may come to you in strange forms, or by strange means.
His tone was that of a father who explained the difficult concepts to his innocent child, caring and sympathetic. The still moment was abruptly interrupted by Luna, who stormed in with the vial, followed by a disgruntled Berenger.
There is nothing that confirms that.
But it does! It must be! It's one of the few vials not of their own blood. And even among those, this one is extremely unique.
Her follower retorted, sounding more whiny than he would be proud of. She placed the vial in a cabinet and turned to Willem, showing immense frustration in her movements.
He thinks it's a good idea to bring this to the Queen of Canehurst. According to his well-pondered idea, the blood is that of Yarnam herself.
Willem seemed surprised, but then again, it was hard to tell with half of his face obscured.
And what basis do you have for that?
He calmly turned to Berenger, not too quick to take sides, and the scholar sharpened his manners somewhat.
There are two types of vials brought back, as you know. The undefined, and some of the Tumerian's own blood.
Willem waved with his hand, urging him to get to the point.
Well, this vial was among the common stores, not that of the undefined, the holy blood.
Wouldn't it be?
Queen Yarnam was supposedly the last, no? Her lineage was extraordinary due to how it bridged our time with theirs. Therefore, the rightful claim of this relic lies with Canehurst.
I understand. You support the theory that the blood's potency faded with their downfall, rendering their splendorous Queen Yarnam's blood without its divine luster. Willem spoke as if to himself, while Berenger eagerly nodded.
Alas, it is just a theory, with no such proof besides some contextual suggestions.
Berenger's expression contorted very subtly, mixed with a slight embarrassed blush and an irritated wrinkle.
Well, honestly, it was this symbol that sparked the theory. It reminds me of home, a nostalgia.
He pointed to Carol's label. Willem only tilted his head down.
But there are still many scientific facts that make the case very strong.
He grew more confident and had likely listed every one of his points had Willem not spoken over him loudly.
Still, it is nothing more than an hypothesis. Here we are scholars, and until we can determine it with proof, nothing is determined, and should therefore remain here. But Her Majesty has the right to it. However that symbol got here, it marks the legacy. She would know. Should know.
Willem leaned forward and looked rather menacing with the mask.
Did you not hear me? Until we can conclude that it truly is the Thumerian Queen's blood, it is not going anywhere. As it is, we don't know if it is Annalise's right or not. And how would she be able to tell if we can't? By removing it, it worsens the odds of finding answers.
He grew silent and gave a pitiful nod, then faded into the background.
Anyways,
Luna breathed out and took a seat with them at the table.
I can imagine the headache. That blood is vile. It was really strange looking closer at it.
What was?
Did you see Carol's thing?
Lawrence nodded.
Well, it was indeed unique, but it appeared sickly. I am not comparing it to the common blood poisoning, but the behavior was certainly something akin. But for the life of me, I have not the slightest clue where he made up that strange notion. Shame your room can't tell us more.
Willem finally shifted in his seat and cleared his throat loudly, a sound that appeared more from sickness than a method of attracting attention.
We know very little of the person that was Queen Yarnum. We know it was under her time that the Thumerian line ended. Might be her doing, though I doubt it. But this being her blood, or at least coming from her time, could make the case that it was a plague that made Thumer what it is today.
They all stewed in the knowledge that the provost provided. Luna lit up with wide eyes and a big smile.
Maybe there is more to be seen. Something more about the Blood's history. Who knows? Perhaps there could be a more concrete notion if Carol used the blood as a medium or something.
To Carol it sounded rather unfounded, like Luna was far detached from how it actually worked. But they would never find out, as it would seem. As she stood to fetch the flask, there was nothing to be fetched. The cabinet stood open, the sinister blood gone, along with Berengar.